Okay, where'd my picture go? Oh, gee, many crickets. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris. Sorry for that little technical fault there. Zoom is playing games with me. It made me blank. I left the meeting when I brought it back on the screen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Wherever you find yourself around the world today, whether it's somewhere in the United Kingdom, in the Scottish Highlands, Wales and Snowdonia, somewhere in Northern Ireland or England itself. Perhaps you're in the Republic of Ireland. There you go, the Emerald Isle. Or maybe you're tuning in from somewhere in Asia. We have fans and supporters and subscribers coming from Hong Kong, Malaysia, Taiwan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. Welcome, folks, and a special welcome to those out there in Africa. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you find yourself in West Africa, bonjour l'Afrique de l'Ouest, c'est bien aujourd'hui. And also for folks in Botswana, Dumela, Botswana, Otsihilijan. South Africa, Sawubona, South Africa, Goeiedag. How is everybody doing? Welcome into Chris Wyatt Africa. Well, today on a special feature, we have a real treat for you, ladies and gentlemen. I am really looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to it all week. I had some wonderful conversations in the build-up to this stream. Today, our guest is Sarah Sall, who is a rugby professional. She's done, gosh, almost anything you can think of in rugby. Let me just run very quickly through before we bring her in. She's a co-creator of Tory Rugby, the original rugby influencer. There you go. There's the acronym right there, the original rugby influencer. Pretty cool, huh? She's been with the U.S. men's national rugby team from 2007 to the 15. She was at the 2011 Rugby World Cup in New Zealand, the 2015 Pan Am Games, the 2015 Rugby World Cup in England, the 2016 Rio Olympics with the Sevens, the 18 World Cup in San Francisco. Many of these places I've also been to, but I wasn't with the team like she was. She was the USA Sevens national team from 2014 until the present. Or until 17, excuse me, and she was at, let's see, she's done all this stuff. She's with Atlantis Rugby Corporation as a player and manager, done medical, done international tours all over the world, Brazil, Rome, Trinidad, Laos, Scotland, Cuba, Tobago. That's the other half of Trinidad and Tobago. Worked with United World Sports, setting up events and doing player welfare. Henderson Girls Rugby head coach from 2000, 2006. The list goes on and on, ladies and gentlemen. So many things. She is also does wellness and nutrition, muscle therapist, professional sports photographer. I don't know that I can do much more of an introduction here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring her into the room real quick. Give me just a moment there. All right, we'll get Sarah in here. There she's coming. All right. Hey, Sarah.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing brilliant. I don't know. Were you able to listen to the introduction, or were you just waiting?
I couldn't hear it.
Okay. Well, it was a wonderful introduction. I said great things about you. So just what I mentioned, kind of stuff in your biography, that you're the co-founder of Tory Rugby, and talked about working with the Sevens teams and with the 15s on the Eagles side. What I didn't say is that, boy, if there's somebody in rugby, you probably know who they are or are familiar with them, acquainted with them. Can you tell folks listening in a little bit about your background, a little bit about your biography? Do it more justice than I could ever do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I played at University of Delaware, and then for a bunch of women's teams, I played a lot of sevens with Atlantis Rugby. So that's where I really started traveling a lot. And Emil Signes is one of my heroes and mentors. We talked about him a little bit the other day. He founded Atlantis Rugby, which is like a samurai or jesters. There's a few teams like it, but it was the first American team that really traveled and went all over. And he used it as a basis of who he invited to sevens camps. But then I started working with the Eagles. At the same time, I kind of had an injury, which was great because it was really hard to be around women's rugby because I was the one that made my friends play, keep playing and play at sevens tournaments on the weekends. And so I started traveling with the men's 15s program in 2008 under Scott Johnson. Australian guy who was a director of Scotland Rugby for a very long time, and I think he just moved back to Australia. And then under Eddie O'Sullivan through the 2011 World Cup, and then Mike Tolkien through 2015. And then when Mike Friday started in 2014, I started on the medical staff with Sevens. So I did a few years and went to the Rio Olympics with them. And then I became manager, and then I left with them in 2018. But I still love traveling on the Seven Series.
No, Sevens can be all encompassing, Ken. It just absorbs you in every way you imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love 15s, but I love the culture of sevens, especially being one of the only females. It's really nice staff-wise because, I mean, there's a couple of years ago, there was 4 other women, but, there's just more interaction. In 15s, you're very isolated from the other teams, which is great But in sevens, we call it a traveling circus, and Rob Fickerman does a podcast called The Traveling Circus. You live with all of the teams, so the players, it's hard for some of them because you're constantly being judged and being watched. If you guys aren't wearing all of the same thing, if you look tired when you walk down at breakfast, there's no personal space, so you see everything. But it's great because, like we talked about, I'm very good friends with most other staffs, probably Japan and Russia. Well, now that's Revy's with Russia. I'm friends with them, but just because of a language barrier, depending on who's on staff. But like, I love Fiji staff. I love South African staff. Is my favorite program besides the U.S. And I love everybody on the U.S.
Well, you won't find much of an objection from me. I'm a massive Blitzbach fan and have been for a long time, ever since I kind of got into sevens, even around the time I got interested in the Eagles. But of course, you and I spoke ahead of time. The thing that drew me into the sevens was Carlin Isles. And when I saw Carlin Isles, I was like, whoa, this game just rocks. I mean, I knew about sevens, but I was never around it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, he will tell you, and all of the players on the series, I mean, they all pretty much have respect for each other because you have to get along. But Carlin is wonderful. He's a wonderful human being. He changed the face of sevens in the States and in the world. As I said, I'll have a USA Rugby sweatshirt on, and somebody will say, "I don't know what that sport is, but who's that really fast guy on YouTube?" I mean, we have amazing players. Like I take credit for a lot of things, but I take credit for Falau Nua. I love him when he got capped in 15s. I think it was like 2000, I forget what year it was, in Toronto, maybe 2010. And when we started sevens and he was playing sevens, I was told Mike Friday, I was like, Falau is going to be our superstar. And he's so good, you don't notice how good he was. So he didn't get on a dream team until like 2 years ago. But he was consistently one of the best athletes. But Carlin is just such a standout, and he's so good at what he does. And ball in hand, I mean, it's hard to match him.
Yeah, no, you're saying about Falau Nua. I'd say the same thing about Maka Nufe on the other side. Both of them, when you watch them, it doesn't strike you as if they're there and doing something, but then at the end of the game, you're like, wow, look at the contribution this guy made. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, we have so many people, like, when I first came on and Madison Hughes was our captain, I was like, oh, who's this, white English kid that, but when you watch him, he's so good. But Maka, when we started, I mean, he's 100% our X factor. And, he struggled with a few injuries and a few different things. But I remember when Sonny Bill Williams in 2016 was playing, and, all the boys, that was, he was somewhat of a lot of the boys' idols. But New Zealand staff would tell me, they were like, the first person we look for on your roster at the time, and this was before Perry became a standout and Carlin but they're like, it's Maka Unefe. He's because he makes a difference when he's on. And I told Maka that, and Maka's just such a humble human being that he was like, oh my God, like, that means they're looking for me. I'm like, no, that means they respect you entirely, because they look and they said, if he's on the field, we know that he's going to make a difference. And, he looked at it as kind of like, oh no, they're marking me. But it was such a big sign of respect, because they were like, Maka is such a good player. So he's 100% an X Factor player.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to see folks like that still got stars in their eyes when they're actually becoming a star and they don't realize it. And that's kind of the thing I like about rugby in general, but sevens specifically. I mean, there's some huge names in the series, but I've never met, I'm sure there's a few out there, but I've never met any prima donnas as far as fans are concerned. I mean, behind the tent, I don't know what happens, but out in the front, from a fan's perspective, I haven't met any sevens players that are just full of themselves. Yeah. They all give their time. They're all willing to chat with people. They'll hang out with you in a pub. They'll come over on the sidelines, and that's across every team I've ever met from every country, and that's one thing I love about sevens.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult. I'm studying this elite athlete well-being, and we talk about some of the personality factors. And it's interesting because some of the factors that make you an elite athlete are some of the things that can kind of drive you over the edge. So, there's been so for example, like Carlin is working on himself every minute of every hour of every day to make himself a better person and a better player. But he's always on. But there's a fine line between being that high level athlete and being always on as to being kind of elitist, but he, for him, he has to say, I'm the best, I'm this. And people have criticized him in the past for that, which I think is ridiculous, because that's what you need to do as an athlete, is you have to believe that you are the best. But there is a humility with all of these players that, again, when all of these big stars came back for, Brian Ban and all the, people came back to try out for the Olympics, they were the rookies on the sevens field. I mean, Brian, played years ago, but they were carrying, like Sonny Bill was carrying luggage because he was the youngest on the squad. There are personalities, and the U.S. team is the most diverse on the series by far. Like the series is diverse, which is why I love it. But for us, we have, 2 All-American kids. We have, 2 kids of Tongan descent, well-to-do English kids. It's just, you're taking 1 or 2 of each team, 2 of from the Fiji team, 2 from England squad, 2 from Wales squad, and putting them together. So it's very hard to coach in a small 1-to-1 ratio and environment.
Well, I think a good point there too is what's important about it is, so, and I go back to this, people talk about rugby in a lot of respects, but to me, it's the one game. I mean, there's a lot of games, but it's the one game where coaching really truly makes a difference. I mean, no dig on Stuart Lancaster. Stuart Lancaster's a brilliant coach, but England crashed out of the 2015 World Cup. He was pitched after that. Eddie Jones comes in and they go on a win streak it matches the best win streak ever in the professional era for a national side. It's so when it comes to sevens, and I think we can talk about this with the men, especially Mike Friday coming in there, what he's done with that team, and being able to, and this is where I'm coming back to, merging the culture, because all those kids, I say kids because they're all kids compared to me now these days, but
I call them boys, yeah.
Exactly. But all these kids are coming from all over with different worldviews and different acculturation and growing up and being on a U.S. team, and you've got to have the Sevens Eagles culture. And that has to be what wins out. And it has to be a good culture, of course. And Mike Friday's done a brilliant job, I think, of making that happen.
Yeah, Mike is brilliant. I mean, he's very much about being your own person and being individual. And there's constantly a debate in the United States of whether we need an American, which I think is ridiculous. And I've spent a lot of time on medical staff, so I spend a lot of time as the only female observing. And kind of sitting back and being not noticed. So I always have an affinity for coaches because I've been around so many head coaches, and even the ones that aren't successful, I know that it's not that they want to do poorly, and we criticize everybody for everything. I mean, it's so absurd. We criticize if Carlin's not doing this, if Perry's not doing this, if they're not on the field at the same time. Like, people don't understand things. But what Mike did that other coaches haven't, and it's true, even my mentor, Emil, years ago when he coached the men's sevens squad, and the coaches before Mike, he took the exact same players, and we were 13th in the world before he came, and we were going to get relegated. We were going to get off the series. I remember with the first cup we won in London when Threaten Palamo was playing. Yeah, it was, which is so exciting. And Threaten had played back when he was like 17 and 18 years old when I first met him. And he was with Saracens at the time and came back. And he was like, God, I remember when it was a big deal to beat Canada. And people forget, like, as soon as we did well that first season. So we went to 13th. Mike came in, and I remember going to camp and watching. And I'm like, wow, the boys can catch and pass. Like, he taught them how to catch and pass and how to be fit. But like, as you're saying, with the culture, Mike did an insanely good job about understanding cultures. And what he's good at is understanding, like, who relates to who. So, Maka and Falau, I relate to really well. So if there was something that he needed to discuss or talk to, he would, I would go talk to them. Or our physio Brian would talk to other people. And so it was a trial and error. And there was arguing, and there was a learning curve. But he really realized how to embrace everyone's individuality. And it was funny because I have this conversation a lot with people, and I was talking to this Fijian player, Asaki, who they call Ice, who played on the series forever, and he's involved with this AYI rugby, which is great. And he was saying in Dubai, he told Mike last year that he was like, you know what? He's like, you know what the U.S. problem is? When they come on the field to warm up, they don't come together. He's like, these people, he's like, that's Fiji, we all come together. And I was like, nice, that's great. But that's what works for your culture. Mike understands that Carlin and Perry, do their own thing and they might need to come in. But once they're on the field we do things by 8-minute increments, so we know, like I have the schedule set, or when I work for them, have the schedule set months in advance. But because of television time at 12:02, if you're warming up, they're there at 12:02 and they're working as a squad. But if they need to do certain things differently to get ready to do that, he allows them to do that. And that's because of trial and error. Like there's been tournaments where he's asked, like, what do I need to do? Do I need to change this? And people have been like, yes. He's like, okay, then I'll change it. Because it's constantly evolving and the squad's constantly evolving. And that's one thing, is culture's not set. You have to adapt to the culture that's created, and you have to understand what the culture is around you. You can't just say, because I've been around some coaches that said, this is your culture. You can't do that. I mean, I say the same thing with club teams. If you are I'm a very competitive person, so I don't do anything for fun, even fun tournaments. I mean, for me, fun is winning and working hard. Like I don't drink. I make sure I stay in the night before. To me, every tournament, even if it's something at the beach, is a big deal. But if, I've been on teams where they're not that competitive, they want to go. So I've left because that's not me. So I can't come in and say this is what the culture should be, because the culture is defined by the people on the team.
Yeah, you're in it to win it. That's why you play the game. That's why I play sports. I play my entire life. It's not about the participation, although I know that's important to people. But and I'm not deadly. I'm not going to cut somebody's throat to win a game or cheat. But it's about the competition, because that drives you to success, and that's where you get your fulfillment from. It sounds like it's the same for you.
Yes, 100%.
Well, let me take a question out of the chat here, because it's a good question. There's a question from Jacques Smith. He said, he's in South Africa, by the way. Is rugby gaining more popularity in the U.S., or has the market been saturated? Before you answer, Sarah, let me just jump in very quickly. I wouldn't say the market's saturated. I would say it's barely damp at this stage. We have a long way to go. We're just now getting around to having television contracts for the Major League Rugby, and it's been difficult to watch the sevens because NBC controls it and you have to pay per view. So Sarah, I'll let you jump in there. Is rugby, is it gaining more popularity, or is the market saturated?
Well, I think, I was skeptical a couple of years ago about Major League Rugby, just because of the way pro rugby for a year was structured before that. But it's 100% not saturated. I mean, there's always room for growth. I think the one thing people need to realize, and like the Premiership has come in and a lot of things have come in, is that baseball, football, and basketball are so big and there's so much money that you can't compete with those sports. There's just no way. Sevens is a little bit more adaptable for some people to watch. I mean, my mom likes watching sevens, and I can get my family to watch sevens because you get to watch so many different games, and it's contained. So if you don't understand all the rules, it's easier to watch. But I think within the market of rugby in the States, there is so much room for growth, and it is growing. But we can't compete with the other sports. And I think rugby in the States still has to develop its own culture. So we need to kind of find a culture between sevens and 15s, but we can't adopt a Premiership. Like, we have to be a little bit more Americanized than the Premiership, because they've come in and we're rowdy. Like, going back to the 7 Series, like when the US goes on, the refs would always laugh because, like when Nate Ebner and Carlin and Kevin Swearin and a couple of our football players and Zach Test, when they be in the going in the tunnel going out to the field, they would, most of the teams are quiet and stand there, and that's just how rugby is. And some of our boys, when they get together, they would get really loud, and the referees would just look around and be like, what is going on? Because it's just not in that. So Americans, we're somewhat loud, and that's part of our charm, I guess. So we have to adapt a culture and then kind of do that. But I think that's what MLR is doing, which is great. And it's also because it's doing it in different areas, like people can identify with the team around them. Because that's another thing that people don't understand, is that our country is so big and it's made up of so many different cultures, like we talked about. Like the culture in California is so much different than the culture in Texas, and so much different than the culture in Utah. So we need those local fans. When I was working with with the 15s team, we realized that we have about like 10,000 dedicated fans that would fly. But as I would tell our sevens staff that's from England, for me to fly to California to watch a test match is 6 hours. So, you could drive 6 hours, but to fly for the weekend or to fly to Chicago, which I love having test match in, or Houston's always been wonderful. It takes a long time and it's expensive. And Americans only have 2 weeks vacation. The average American, only has 2 weeks vacation. So you have to pick and choose what you go to. So it gets expensive to go to all these matches all over the country. And the country's so big, you only have so much time. So it's difficult.
No, it's a good point. So, in fact, you mentioned the defunct Pro Rugby League. In fact, I was so hungry after I came back from Africa for professional rugby to make it here, its debut in the States. When that league debuted, I drove all the way to Ohio for 6 hours for the last game of the season, which was between Denver and the Ohio Aviators. And it was at a field in Columbus, but not even a proper stadium. It was okay for a field, but it wasn't a stadium. And I drove 6 hours to watch that game. I introduced my nephew to the game, and he's like, I love this game. I got to get into rugby, but there was nothing around him. But that league was kind of a mess because one guy owned all the franchises, and he was having some disputes with USA Rugby to release players. And anyway, but Major League Rugby really has. I wasn't skeptical. I was prayerful. I was hopeful that it was going to do something. But the challenge for a lot of us, of course, is that a lot of the big rugby communities are actually here on the Atlantic seaboard. That's where some of the big traditional rugby places are. You're from Philadelphia, lots of rugby there. But we had no teams on the East Coast. So the first season, I'm like, who do I root for? Utah. So I decided to be a Utah fan, and they had a terrible season. But then they got a New York team, and for the first time ever, I became a fan of a New York franchise, the Rugby United. And then DC. Last year, I did some articles, I did news coverage of DC. So. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. But when it comes to rugby, Sarah, give me your thoughts on this. But one of the things I tell people, the reason there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about American rugby. The first of which is Americans don't play rugby. Well, that's nonsense. We have more registered rugby players than any country in the world. The U.S. does, even ahead of a place like New Zealand. Of course, it's a lot smaller, but even ahead of England, I believe, or maybe we're second behind England. Anyway, but we're way up there. But that's the first thing. The second thing is that we've been playing rugby forever. I mean, we were the Olympic champions in 1920 and 1924.
Yep.
People forget about that. But the problem, I think, is this. Looking historically as a historian, that's one of the roles I have. One of the problems we have is that because rugby didn't enter the professional era until a century after 80 years after professional football and baseball had been long established and became massive money-making machines, they missed the window. So if rugby had been professional in the 1920s, I think that rugby would just be as big as what you find for football and baseball today and basketball and even hockey. But I mean, NHL wasn't even this big. Even the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s, NHL didn't become big until massive expansion across the U.S. when it added teams in Arizona, Los Angeles, and places like that. And I think that one of the reasons why rugby is not associated with the United States is because it wasn't a paid sport back in the 20s and 30s. And if it had been, a century later, we would see rugby in the same level as we see these other sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it comes. A lot of it comes down to money. I think when people watch it, like you're saying, or accessibility, is that you want to cheer for something that somebody you know. Like, I'm not actually a big sports fan in the sense I only like watching people I know or programs that I have a personal connection with. And I'm very, very big on personal connections. And I think that's what needs to market rugby in the States is like you feel like you know Carlin because he puts himself out there and he doesn't hide himself. Todd Clever did an insanely great job about marketing just because of who he is. He's such a wonderful person, but marketing and he's been the face of American rugby. Samu Manoa is probably one of our most talented, successful players, and Chris Wiles, but Todd, because he's such a good person and on all the time, but it's hard. He markets the sport really well. So as you're saying, like you had to drive to Ohio, which I don't know how long did that take you? I mean, you're a little.
It's about 5-6 hours if you don't speed.
Right. So 5-6 hours. And so, Mike Friday would say he would drive 6 hours in the UK, but you're probably not driving through much during those 6 hours to get to.
It's kind of like this in Ohio.
So yeah, I mean, to support, which I love because so many people are playing, so many of my players are playing on each team. I've driven to New York for a bunch of the games, which isn't that far, and then DC. I'm a big fan of DC as well. But it would be so much easier if there was a Philadelphia team to drive to. But the problem is too is the weather. You know, we've had so many people on the East Coast that play rugby, but our West Coast teams have been a little bit better, and I'm sure you've probably understood this, but we have a big problem about field space, and especially probably now after COVID, like turf fields, which I think, you know, you have to clean all of the time. Like there's just, even my club team, like we just didn't have a field to practice on because, you know, New York practices, you know, on, I don't know if they're on Randall's Island or Columbia, but I know the New York women would practice on Randall's Island, and you're sharing that. I mean, even where I live in Philadelphia, like there's not that many fields to go around that adult teams can practice on. So it's hard to get that. And because of the weather, you know, in March, it's horrible to start training in. So that's why I think the West Coast has been better, and places where the environment is a little bit nicer because they can train year round, and they play year round. Like, you know, it's really hard to do rugby skills in a gym, but that's what you have to do sometimes.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. One of the challenges, like for the Collegiate Rugby Championship, which is sponsored by Penn Mutual here in Chester and Philadelphia each year. Well, they skipped a year, but the first few years I was able to attend that, Cal came out every year, and they just were awesome. Why? Well, because they're able to attract great talent, but also because they can train year round. You can play rugby all year in California.
Yeah, no, and I think now that, you know, colleges, I mean, everybody asks me, I'm like, almost every college has a rugby team. So now, but you know, when I was at University of Delaware, we were club a little bit below ice hockey. But I mean, they would give us field time. But now they're considered more of a club sport. You know, a lot of my friends coach NCAA programs. So when they have their own dedicated field, you know, the weather becomes less of an obstacle. But when they're not, like you're competing for all of these things. So.
Well, speaking of which, when Major League Rugby got going, they hadn't announced where Rugby United New York was going to play, and I'm like, hold my fingers, please be in New Jersey, because it cuts down on my commute. But then they announced Coney Island. I'm like, oh my God, no, that's artificial turf. Playing rugby on artificial turf, that sucks.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the Sevens boys will tell you. They had a big issue because there are turf fields, Vancouver, but because of the weather, the turf there is really good. In Vegas, I helped the company that ran that before it moved to LA, and there were some issues with the turf there. And it's because of the climate in Las Vegas. They did everything. The person that did it in World Rugby came in. So one year it was horrible, and the boys and I'm not sure if the women that were there at that time, I know they were the next year, but got horrible turf burn. So the next year, I mean, they had World Rugby come in a few times and check it out. And they did everything. I mean, they did everything that they were supposed to do. World Rugby checked it out because player welfare is number one. If you don't have, I mean, your players are your product. So if you don't have healthy players, you can't play. But it's just the climate in Las Vegas was so horrible. It was so hard to keep this turf playable. So they had to move it back to grass the next year. And then they moved it, but they were going to be in that new $2 billion stadium that they were building. But it's funny because the week after in Vancouver, they would play on turf. But the turf was good. Like I'm pretty sure Saracens plays on turf as well. But they have, I think it's like 4G. So again, it has to do with the climate.
Yeah, no, I have to tell you that I played football, American football on turf in California, and I did not like it at all. It was just they did it for maintenance purposes. Sorry?
Yeah. The ball bounces differently. I mean, it's a different game. I mean, it changes, just like the rain equalizes, the turf changes your whole thing. And people used to think like, oh, this, you know, people didn't realize that a company ran the Sevens tournament for a while, not our union. And like as the States, it was, you know, quote unquote, our home. And people would say, oh, are you so glad you're playing at home? I'm like, Vegas is not my home. Even though it's a lovely place. I'm like, I don't live anywhere near here. And it's not my hometown. But, you know, because we have three of the fastest players on the series, or we don't like the Vegas field because it wasn't wide enough. Like we want as much space as possible. So they made it a little bit wider, but it still wasn't ideal for us. So we never had that home field advantage, as they said.
Yeah, that's kind of an odd thing when people talk about home field advantage and they talk about rugby for the Eagles. I don't think the men's and the women's. I don't think of it that way. I just look at, hey, let's get a win wherever we go, or let's play as best we can wherever we go. Whereas when I think of the Springboks, anywhere in South Africa play, it's a test match. It's a home game. Same with England, wherever they're at, it's a home game. But when it comes to the Eagles, I don't know, because we're so big and it's not been around all. We didn't even have a national team until '94, so or '84, excuse me. So yeah, it's kind of a weird feeling. It's not really a home game, but it is a home game.
Yeah, well, I think again a lot of that has to do with marketing, and I mean everyone that's been in these jobs means well about marketing the sport, but we haven't done it, I think, until MLR into to the correct way. So I've been at matches, I think in Carson, California, where we played Tonga, and there's a big Tongan community, and we have a lot more Tongan fans. I mean, and I've been, there's been matches in Philadelphia that I didn't know about. International, not the Eagles, of course, but like some Premiership matches that I didn't know till last minute because they weren't marketed well. But that's again why I love sevens, is because initially, and I think that's one thing is at the World Cup. It was great when in Japan when they started doing the players and families wearing the shirts with the players' names on them, because you could be sitting next to some Australians or some Tongans and not know that their son is playing for the U.S. because they might not be speaking English, but they're cheering for the U.S. And so sevens, I've seen it evolve over the years where we have this probably the smallest fan base when we go overseas, and Fiji has a huge base, but our players have become so good that you cannot not cheer for Perry Baker when he's on the field. Like, it's such good rugby that other fans have started cheering for us. So, the first year the series moved to Paris, the French basically didn't cheer for anyone but France. But it was wonderful. They put French flags on every other seat. So everybody had a French flag and was waving it. But once Perry, started making these runs, and Carlin, like, you can't not cheer for the States. So people, like, it's good rugby. So you have to appreciate it. So, because your team, so if you're South African and, again, I love Neil and I love the entire team, and their program is my favorite program besides the States, and how they're run, because that's how I judge things off their staff and how they run their program as a whole. And this is how I see them behind the scenes. But so if they're not playing, then if and say the States is playing England, you're cheering for good rugby. So then it gives you more of a chance to watch and be more exposed. Where in 15s, you're very limited because you're only watching two teams. Like, I thought it was great at the Japan World Cup last year, because I've always worked at the last two World Cups, so I never really got to watch as a fan. But I went down to the quarterfinals. That's the first time where I saw 4 15s teams interact with each other. So when I went to the Australia match on the first night, there were people that went down to Oita to watch all 4 games. So, on the train on the way back, like, the French fans were singing and cheering with the Welsh fans and the Australian fans and the England fan. Like, but I've never seen 15 teams interact like that. Whereas sevens, you see all these fans interact all the time.
Absolutely. But that's because you've been inside the wire. You've been where they're making the sausage at, so you don't have a chance to reflect and see all that. By the way, that Oita Stadium, wow, what an amazing stadium! That thing is just wild looking.
I was so impressed because it's funny. I've been to Japan about 5 times for rugby, because Japan's a tier 2 nation in 15s, and then when I first started with sevens, I think there was 1 year in Tokyo, but I've never really got to see anything in Japan. I think I went to, because we'd always be in Tokyo and Nagoya, but I was working, so I didn't really get to see anything. So I was kind of like, oh, and I didn't love it being like a younger female, and just the culture of Japan. Like, if I would go out by myself, because I was the only female on the squad, they even, asked, just because of the culture, like, people wouldn't really speak to me. But I had such a good time in Japan. I think I told you I was going to go for 2 weeks. I ended up staying a month and staying for the finals. But it was so well run. I mean, seeing everybody pick up trash, like holding up cups of water as you were leaving the stadium. I mean, though Oita Stadium was a little difficult to get to.
Yeah, it was way out of town, and you had to go way down this hill, and it was, yeah.
Yeah, there were some problems with I don't know if you were there on the Friday or Saturday. The buses, took forever to get out of there. And you really, I mean, the first night. So then it was amazing for the France match. I watched some people leave early. I'm like, you're at a World Cup and you're leaving early. And like, that was one of the most exciting matches I've ever been to because, unfortunately, oh God, I felt so bad for that player. He did a horrible thing about elbowing that guy, but I was like, oh, he has to live with that for the rest of his life, and he retired shortly after. And his team has to, everybody was chastising them, but it was one person that did a stupid thing in the heat of the moment, and it was stupid, but it cost them what I think. I mean, I thought they were winning that match, and then they were playing down. So it was one of the only 15s matches where it was up to the last 10 minutes. It was so exciting. Like you didn't know who was going to win. But people were leaving early because of the bus situation, which I thought was crazy because I'm like, it's not like you're down the road. You've traveled to Japan and you're at the quarterfinals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Uita's kind of out of the way too because there's no Shinkansen that runs down to that route. No rapid trains, so you just got to take the slow boat to China sort of thing. So when I left there, I had to wait for those buses an interminable amount of time, then get back downtown. I went straight in to book my ticket, and train after train after train after train was booked. Thank goodness I had a first class ticket, which meant I could have booked anywhere. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to seat because I was able to get a seat in first class. But I went from there all the way back up to, I can't think of the name of the town, going down to Kumamoto. I stayed in a town 2/3 way to Kumamoto that night. So I got to my hotel late at night, and it was in a town where there wasn't rugby, so it was easy. I already had it booked, but it was quite a challenge. Hey, let me do a little bit of housekeeping here very quickly, so I can let people know. Folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here. My special feature guest today is Sarah Sall, who's a long-time rugby pro, who's been involved with rugby at every level for over 25 years now, as a player, as a coach, as a manager, involved in fitness and many other aspects of it. And we're talking about just rugby in general here, but we've covered a lot of ground so far. But I did want to say something here, Sarah, is that Elizabeth said in the chat that Sarah is a great inspiration for young girls and women. That's kind of nice. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I mean, I've been one of the only females, which I didn't realize at first, probably in men's rugby for such a long time, through 2 World Cups and the Rio Olympics. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm a big proponent of women's rugby. I started a girls' high school program in our area. I coached girls' high school, and but again, when I got injured, I had to stop playing, so it was really difficult for me. But I think it's really important that people have to see something so they can achieve it. So you have to see other females, and it is a hard lifestyle. I mean, traveling, it's wonderful. People are like, oh, you're so lucky, it's so great, but it's not as glamorous as it. Like I said, I've been to Japan 5 times, but I basically fly to the I see the hotel, the stadium, and the physio room, and that's basically it. I mean, even on my day off, it's you're not off. And in sevens we're luckier. In 15s, the United States is a tier 2 nation, so South Africa gets to travel a lot nicer places, in New Zealand because they're tier 1. We would go to Romania, which is beautiful, and Georgia, but we go to Europe in the winter, and we go to South America in the summer. And Uruguay is gorgeous, but you're just like, I'm like, why are we going to the hottest places in the middle of the summer or the coldest places in the winter? But you're very isolated. But you're there to work. In sevens, we get to stay really nice places, but you're also there to work. So if it's a walk from the hotel, but I can go there. So it's nice to have a coffee shop outside your hotel. And so like in Sydney, they stayed out by the Opera House, and in Paris, they stayed by the Champs-Élysées. So it's great for the mile outside your hotel, but again, you're there to work, and you're only there for a week. So you're going to trainings, you're going to practices, you're going to the stadiums, and it's all wonderful, but you don't get to really experience the culture or see everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's what's interesting from a fan's perspective is that if you go to a place and you rock up in a hotel somewhere without even knowing it, and the team is there, that sort of thing. So I went to Fukuoka, where I watched the Eagles play against France, and the score doesn't show it, but that was a competitive game. Up until the 60th moment, the French fans were wetting their nappies. They were wetting their diapers. I'm telling you, they were, because I had French fans all around me. I was sitting with some of the players' families from the American side, from Hunko Hemeshuis, his mother, sitting there. And the French were running their mouths, of course, and being obnoxious before the game started. And about the 60th minute, they were getting really, really quiet. And then we had a few blown tackles, and they scored a few tries. But the Eagles were in the Hilton Sea Turtle, which is an amazing hotel. I'm a Hilton Diamond member, so I booked a place there. And and they upgraded me. I was like, well, it was amazing. So I ran into all the players all over the hotel. But that's kind of the interesting aspect of it too. When you go somewhere and like, hey, the team is here. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, and there's, I mean, again, I'm biased like you, but I think just rugby in general, the culture is, I mean, I don't ever feel like I can't go up to somebody. I mean, and I'm again, I've worked really hard to have the experiences I have, so I'm not really impressed by how famous anybody is because to me, I don't care. I care how good of a person you are. But our, the states, our boys are just such wonderful human beings, and we've been lucky. I mean, I really like. I haven't worked with Gary Gold, but I really like him, and he knows that I consider most of these players my family. So they always include me in things. So I stayed. This was my first World Cup I went to go as a fan, and I went, and they invited me afterwards. And I've been at a lot of conferences and different things with Gary and with their staff, and they're wonderful because they understand that that's part of knowing your team is knowing your makeup, and what's important to them. And the coach before that, Todd Clever, I worked with for such a long time that was with the sevens team, so I didn't work with John Mitchell and before that. So I stopped after Mike Tolkien because Olympics were 2016, so that was the priority for me as a staff member. I was with the sevens program, and because we switched to 10 series stops, it overlapped a lot of the 15s matches in June, and because of Olympic qualifiers and that kind of stuff. But they would make sure that I was invited when Todd got his 60th cap and when he retired, because I go out to dinner with his mother. She calls me her daughter. You're living with these athletes, and so I probably have about 100 brothers because I call them all my brothers. But you're experiencing this high level of stress and these emotions that you're going through. So even if you're only on a 2-week tour, there's so many emotions and so much going on within that you have to like each other, or it just doesn't work. I mean, chemistry and culture, as we talked about, is such a big thing.
No, absolutely. I was in Vegas checking in my hotel a couple years ago, and it was supposed to be just, you swipe something, you go in, but it was broken, of course. So you had to stand there and wait to check in. And some lady was there, and we just started chatting. And I think I had a rugby shirt. I said, "Oh, you're here for the rugby?" So yeah, no, I'm here for the rugby. I came out last year. It's my second year coming out. So it's pretty impressive. I enjoy it. And she goes, "Yeah, no, my son plays rugby." I said, "Oh, that's great. What's he in high school or something like that?" No, he plays here. I said, "Who's he play for?" Well, he plays for the Eagles. Ben. I said, "Is your name Pinkelman?"
I love the thing. Ben, what a good player Ben is. I always, I mean, even though there's I forget how short I am because I'm 5'3" until I look at pictures. I'm like, oh, because I'm around everybody that's like 6'2". So Ben, when he started, and I always say this like on his birthday, this because I do all these birthday montages, is he started at a camp, I guess, years ago because he's from Colorado, when Mike Tolkien was coaching. And I remember Mike was saying, I think he might have been under Eddie. I forget. But Ben had just started college or something like that. And he's like, you see that skinny white kid? I'm like, that kid? He's like, yeah, he's going to be really good. And I think they wanted him to leave and, play for the Eagles, but Ben wanted to stay in college. When he started with sevens, and he reminded me actually a lot of Todd Clever, the way he runs, he's kind of curved back, but he's so smart. Like you can just see him evolve. And so a couple of years ago, I'm like, he's so smart. He's going to be so good. And he's such a wonderful human being as well. But he just observes everything around him. And Mike Friday is brilliant at breaking down film. Like he's too good because his mind, he can see things and I'm like, I don't know how he did that. So, but Ben is like probably one of the only people that can keep up with him doing that. And now that Ben has like grown into himself a little bit more and he's filled out a lot, he's just a phenomenal player and he's just going to get better and better.
I absolutely agree. So listen, we got a question here, and this is a very good question from Elizabeth, who paid you that compliment earlier. She says, this is for Sarah. My daughter has a question. So it's not even Elizabeth's question, it's her daughter's question. So she's watching. So we got another viewer there. Okay. So what's the best way to get into sevens? And it says country, team, age. Okay. So what's the best country to do it? Best team, age? Complicated question there.
Well, I think the one thing I see that athletes don't do enough is ask. And I think women are a little bit better about this than men. But I've had so many players say, um, you know, how do I get into this? I'm like, well, have you asked the coach? Because that's part of it. Is like, again, our country is so big that even though our coaches do such a good job about scouting everyone, if somebody doesn't, especially if they're playing one saying, because now we try to get people specialized in sevens or 15s, just because they're played the same, but their seasons overlap, and now the sevens is such a predominant part of the game, is that sometimes you can't do both. But sometimes, you don't want to, if you're playing sevens, the 15s coaches don't know if you want to play 15s, or it conflicts with things. But if you ask them, I mean, when we have amazing athletes like Garrett Bender, who could be playing in the Olympics right now, who retired, but he could still play if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. So if you don't know if somebody really wants to, and that's half of it, is their desire and their will to play. So and in the States, a lot of things have to do with funding as well. So I always use my friend Carrie Dubray as an example. She played for the U.S. women's team, and she went and she's asked to audit a women's camp because they only have so much money to invite people to camp. But if you ask to go audit something and you have your cleats and whatever, they're going to let you train. And so she got picked up and played for the U.S. and was an Eagle because she was simply there and she jumped in training. Same with the men's 15s team. We used to scrimmage when Dan Payne was a coach at Life University a lot. And we picked up one of their props once because he was playing better than some of our players. So it's a lot of it is exposure, but a lot of it, the good thing is our coaches are accessible. So a lot of things is just saying like, hey, this is what I want. What can I do to get better?
No, I think
So I know in South Africa, I know the women's program isn't, they're such a good program, but I think there was some issues with the last Olympics about pulling out of it. So I don't know much about the women's there, but in the States, a lot of it is just, you email the coach and say, what can I do? I want to play at this level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think here's the thing. For any advice out there, if there's obviously the South Africans probably can figure it out, but South African women's rugby is not particularly strong in that it's not all over the place. But whatever the question is, was male or female here in the States especially, if you have interest in rugby, use Google. Start there, okay? Google for rugby clubs, look for them, look for rugby programs in your area. When I came back from Africa, I wanted to play a role in rugby in the local area. I didn't realize how involved my job was going to be at the War College, so I wound up not having the time for it. But I contacted the Harrisburg Rugby Club, and they were all excited about it. And I just want to come coach or assistant coach, help out, help market the sport or, raise money or whatever. And they're like, hey, listen, we want you to play on our 7th team. I'm like, you haven't even seen me play, So my point is that sometimes, as Sarah says, you just have to ask. But go on Google, do a search, find where the games are played around you. I mean, listen, if you want to play Little League, it's easy. It's been set up for 100 years, right? 75, 100 years. If you want to play softball, it's been set up forever. If you want to play football, those things plus they're built into the school system. So that's something you progress into. But rugby's not in most places, so it's around. You might be surprised to find it in West Virginia. It's in West Virginia. You can find rugby. Just use Google. It's your friend. Go check things out, and you can probably find a great opportunity. And what we find, especially in rugby, is that some really talented athletes are not playing rugby, and if they get a chance to play it, they can just become rock stars in it. I mean, Perry Baker didn't grow up playing rugby. He had to transition to rugby. He was a football guy, and look at this guy. He's just amazing.
Yeah, he is. I was actually at his wedding last December, or a year and a half ago now. His coach from college was there, who got him over, and Perry's still good friends with him. And I think that's what you're saying. It's amazing how accessible I think most rugby players and coaches in general are, if you just ask. But again, it's all about asking and showing that you want to be there, because that is part of that the desire is so much about being an elite athlete and playing at a high level that it's not, I'm sure the NFL is a little harder to get into and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing. If I see anybody with a rugby shirt, no matter what it is, in an airport, I will go up to them. I don't think you do the same with soccer or lacrosse or football. I mean, I wouldn't even, if somebody's wearing like Philadelphia Eagles, I wouldn't go up to them as much as I would go up to somebody that had, a Fiji rugby shirt on. Like I said, people come up to me with when I'm wearing U.S. stuff and ask about Carlin all the time. So it's people are very helpful in the rugby world.
No, I absolutely agree. It's a very approachable sport, no matter where people are. So, for instance, I have connections in rugby that, like, why would I have these connections? I mean, I didn't grow up with rugby. I just fell into it at university and enjoyed the game ever since then, but wasn't around it for a long time. But I mean, Jaco Piper, one of the top officials in the world. I know the guy. Craig Joubert. I'm standing in San Francisco at the World Cup, and I'm like, hey, you're Craig Joubert. He's like, yes, I am. We had a conversation with him.
A wonderful guy. He's so nice. He's so polite. And
Yeah, no, he was a great official. It was just a bummer what happened in the World Cup in 2015 because I would love to say, I mean, that's not why he left, but he switched to sevens after that, and I wish he's just a fantastic guy. But no, but it's and James Kennedy, the owner of Rugby United New York. I reached out to him, been in contact with him. You know James. That's just the
yeah,
nature. That's just the nature of the game. It's really an awesome aspect of rugby, I think.
yeah, it is. But I would say one thing. You're saying that about Craig, but I hate that. That's what I hate too, because I mean, you know, depending on your opinion, like it's one thing, but he's such a good official and he's so good at what he does. And now he oversees all the referees on the Seven Series. Um, but I hate that it's like you define him, not you, but I'm saying that he's defined by like one moment, and he's done so many amazing things. But he's so well respected, and he's just such a lovely human being.
Well, without a doubt, on the 15 series, he was, in my view, the singular best official on the pitch. He was just amazing. I'm a huge fan of Jaco Piper, of course, too. Nigel Owens, big fan of his.
He sent me his book, actually. I forgot it. He signed a copy after. It's what I'm going to read next.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, but yeah, and he writes really well too. He does some really great articles, puts out there, which is great.
I just love the way he speaks to the players. I mean, again, that's the great thing about sevens too. Is like, so I've become good friends with like Rasta, who switched to go back to 15s, but he's a South African.
Oh, I love Rasta. He's amazing, and he's actually, he doesn't try to be, but he's entertaining on a pitch.
Yeah. So, and Craig and Richard Kelly from New Zealand and Patty O'Brien, because those of you that see the inner workings of sevens, Mike Friday not only breaks down film for our team, but he would break down it for the referees. And he would break down for other teams about the referees. So he's very famous for the head referee, Patty O'Brien, sits up in a box in the back. So if you ever watch Mike on the field, he's famous for looking back and putting his arms up and like talking to Patty and saying, what was that call? What was that call? And then he'll go right away and run and he'll show referee. So the referee, like he's very much on the game being fair. So the referee's all like, oh, Mike's coming. And he's calmed down about it a little bit. And it's all justified. And Mike is wonderful if you say like, hey, these are those and these explain it. He goes, okay, got it. But you have to tell Mike all of the details about everything. So I became very good friends with the referees because we would interact with them a lot. So yeah, Rasta and Patty O'Brien and Nigel, of course, didn't do sevens, but just through 15s, know him. And we were in that movie Behind the Try Line together. I like to say, it's me and the Prince and Johnny.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, but not to dump on any officials, as a tried and true Springboks fan since 1984. I'm not I actually I shouldn't say I'm not a fan because they do a fine job, but I cringe whenever I find out that Romain Poix or Jerome Garces are calling a Springboks game. I always get nervous about the outcome of the game when I hear that. So I'll just say that up front.
Yeah, well, it's again, same as coaches, like the referees, it's like they want to do a good job. That's like they do this wonderful thing where they on the series, I mean they do it in 15s as well, is that they go over the laws like with the coaches. So they'll put everybody in the room and they'll say, okay, they'll go over a film. So say, like I remember once it was about Ben Pinkelman pushing ball, whether he's on his feet in contact. And then it was when they changed the laws to where if it was an intentional knockdown, here. And I remember Craig saying like, so you want us to judge. So he had all the coaches watch the film and say, okay, is this intentional or this? So you want in real time, you want us to be consistent. That's your number one thing. And you want us to judge an angle of a hand of whether this. So we all know that, it's unintentional if you hit it backwards. But during a match at real time, you want us to judge an angle of a hand and be consistent. So yes, we know that it's not always intentional, but if you want consistency, we have to say, this is a penalty for a knock on. Like we can't judge it, whether it's 45 degrees or 48 degrees or 50 degrees. Because you just watched, he had all the cooks just watch, and you just watched it 3 times in slow motion, and you have different opinions about it. So we're doing this off of real time and making a call off of this. So, I mean, it's a really good thing because he's empowering the coaches and they have changed the laws or interpreted the laws to how the coaches want the game played. But he said, he gives them ownership to say, okay, what do you guys think? You tell me what you think. And it shows that, but he empowers them to do that, which is great.
Well, I would say 2 things about it. When it comes to not sevens, but in 15s, the thing as a fan that's been the most frustrating is the way the rules for the scrum keep changing. At least they seem like they keep changing, and how it's done, and what people consider to be an offense in the scrum. But I will say this about rugby officials, in my view. The only sport that comes remotely close to this, in my view, that actually where the officials have to be fit and they're working as hard as the athletes, is soccer. And in soccer, it's not even as close. Rugby, I mean, those guys are jetting down the field on every play. You have to be all over the field. A soccer official can stay in one part of the field. You run up and down, but you don't run back and forth across. Whereas that lead official on the field is right in the middle of everything, and you've got to stay out of the way too. And you've got to catch all these infractions. Now you've got side judges to help you, but that's a tough job. I don't think people appreciate how much work and how hard.
Yeah, they're super fit, and they have their own training schedules, and they have their own physios, and they work really hard all week. I mean, they have their own training schedule up until a match. And in sevens, you do some hit outs or scrimmages during the week as well with other teams. But I have a friend who refed on the series a little bit, who's from Villanova, where I live. His name's Mike Kelly as well. And I would do fitness testing for him at home, because these top level referees have to put in their scores even at a club level, let alone on the World Series. I mean, yeah, to keep up with Carlin and Perry or be anywhere on the field with them is pretty insane. So
I've actually seen a couple of officials get closer to Perry and Carlin chasing down the field than some of the opponents on occasion. That's impressive.
Ross is super fit. Richard Kelly is. They're all really fit.
Really amazing. So let me do a little bit of housekeeping. Gert Fori asked, who is this lovely lady? I said, well, this is Sarah Alisal. She is a rugby pro. I say rugby pro because she's done everything. And you've been in every level. I mean, coaching, playing, managing, fitness, promotion, you've done it all. So she's a rugby pro, and she's been with USA Rugby and done a lot of different things, World Cups, HSB 7 series, all over the world. So that's who our special guest is today. So she's in. Now, Sarah, let me, we were talking about marketing earlier, and not to beat up on this one, but this was just share my thoughts. And I don't know if you were involved in this or if you know much about it, but the Springboks Wales game that was played in our third world stadium in the U.S. in RFK in D.C. Yeah, it is. I've seen better stadiums in the worst parts of Africa where I lived. But that stadium is just a disaster. But anyway, so that game was played there, and they did it the same weekend as the Collegiate Rugby Championship, which is a huge event here on the East Coast. And it's a few hours drive. Well, it takes 3 hours at least to get between D.C. and there. I actually usually go to the CRC, and I left to go down to watch the Springboks game and then came back up for the rest of the CRC. But that thing didn't seem to be marketed very well. There's only like 26,000 of us at that stadium, and it rained. The rain can't affect anything, but everything else, a small crowd, a horrible stadium in the middle of another big tournament taking place. It's 3 hours away. The rain just seemed fitting at the end.
I was actually, I think that was at 2019, 2018.
It was 18. That was Rossi Erasmus's first test match.
18. So I was actually working for USA Sevens, United World Sports, that puts on the CRC. So I was in Philadelphia, where I live, at that tournament. So I think one of the issues that we talk about, not only location and geographics, is, I can't say it. I think Dan Lyle, so I can't speak for their marketing efforts because I was focused on CRCs. And I think the one thing is that we should all be promoting everything. And I don't know the reasons behind why it was that weekend. I'm sure there's a reason why, because there always is, and that's something we don't know about. And people have criticized, why are you having it on a Friday? Why are they playing Tonga on a Friday night? Nobody can get there because of traffic. And it's because we're going to Japan, and that's the way the test, the test matches are. So it's not up to us, it's up to World Rugby, or it's up to, the fact that we're flying to Japan and have to play on a Wednesday. So there's so many things behind it. But just the way, because rugby is still in kind of like a niche sport here, unfortunately, a lot of those fans from DC are coaching, those rugby players that would go to these matches are coaching college teams that were playing in the CRCs. So everybody's kind of intertwined in the rugby world in the States right now. So I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a shame, because something like that, I mean, I would have loved to go to, but again, I was working there, or I would have 100%, how many chances do you get to see South Africa? But the same thing happened before, obviously our All Blacks match got sold out when we played in Chicago at Soldiers Field a couple years ago. And then the next year before, so I guess that was 2014. 2015, we played Australia a month before the World Cup. So they thought that was going to be a huge thing. But again, a lot of these fans that are going to come watch Australia were already slated to go to the World Cup. So why are they going to come pay all this money? Because, I mean, Chicago is expensive to go to. I mean, the airport's far from from downtown, so it takes, you can't just fly in and out. And so it costs you a couple $1,000s to do that. And all of those fans that would be at that match were probably going to the World Cup for a couple weeks the next week. So they were going to get to see Australia. We're not there yet. But I think that's what MLR is doing, is that they are building that local fan base and making people more aware, which is one of the biggest things, is awareness, so that and you have an affinity, like, oh, okay, like I love Mike Petrie, or I love, you get to know these players, so you root for them, so then you follow them. So that's how I knew Saracens was playing in Philadelphia, because we had Chris Wiles and TT, well, I don't think TT was playing with them at the time, and Hayden Smith, and so I follow what they do because they're my friends and family, and so I know where they're playing when they're playing. But if it's a team that I don't know anybody on, I'm not going to follow that as much, because I have to search for it. So again, that's where I think MLR is helping the game grow. And even though we want grassroots to grow, I'm such a firm believer in, you have to have a Todd Clever, you have to have a Perry Baker. One of the greatest things is I have like two sets of friends who I played with, my one friend, she played on my team, and her husband played on the men's team at Brandywine, and they got married and had kids. And one year, one of her kids, she's like, oh, my son Brett scored his first try. He's 8 years old. And I was so excited he scored his first try. But more importantly, he centered the ball. And I asked him, Brett, how did you know to center go? He goes, oh, that's what Perry Baker would do. And I was like, oh my God, that's so great. And it was funny. I forget where I was at the time, but I was with the team, and I showed Perry, and he was like, oh, this is actually before that CRCs that we were talking about, because that's when he came there, because Brett asked a question. I don't know if you remember, there was a question and answer. And I showed Mike Friday, and he's like, Perry wouldn't center the ball. What is he talking about? So anyway, then Brett, we did a question and answer. I brought Perry Baker and Danny Barrett and Madison to the CRCs, and they did a big question and answer with Mike Friday. And Brett asked a question about I think his father had told him, but about like, how do you defend Perry Baker if you have two people, whatever. But then he got, Perry signed his ball, but it was so cute because Perry wrote him a cute message afterwards. And then two other friends that had kids, like they wanted a Madison Hughes signed jersey, and the boys are so happy to do this for them. But it's so cool that these kids are like, oh, I want to be like that when I grow up, and they're creating such a positive impact for these players, for these kids.
No, absolutely. But the challenge is if it's not on television, because it's such a big country. I mean, kids in Kansas aren't going to see it and they can't emulate it, but kids in Kansas can watch football on TV and baseball. So I think one of the encouraging things about Major League Rugby is that this year they kept increasing. They had local television contracts for like Seattle's club, and they had some others, and then they got a CBS contract. They also got, they had an ESPN. So this year they had some really good coverage, and unfortunately the season, because of this pandemic, got shelved. But I think it was really getting a lot of traction. And I agree with you. When kids have, well, that's what Perry Baker would do. The sport is catching fire when that happens.
Yeah. But I mean, you have to have somebody to look up to, and a good role model, and somebody that responds well to that, to have something to dream to. But I think it also shows, because NBC puts it on, or whatever television programs that put on, like they have to be able to see that. I mean, I remember with Kevin Swearing watching, the women's in Dubai, like waking up at 2 a.m, or even years ago going to pubs at like 4 a.m. to watch matches. So it's still difficult because of the time zones to be able to watch everything. Because if you want to watch it live, you do have to wake up early, and that's one of the challenges. But you know, those two new teams, it's funny because people are criticizing the names of the Giltinis or the Gilgronis, and
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like,
named after a drink.
yeah, well, it's named after the guy's last name who named it after a drink. But to me, I'm like, great, whatever. They're promoting rugby in the States, so good for them. I mean, I don't care what the name is. Like, I'm trying to. I think it might get canceled, but go to the Safari Sevens in Kenya and bring a bunch of the boys that played at the Olympics and to go to this complex in Malawi, to this rugby complex to promote them. And I'm like, if somebody wants to fund my team and call us the Pink Unicorns, like I'll call them Pink Unicorns. I don't care if they're going to give me money to promote it because the Americans aren't putting the money into it. So if these Australians want to do it, that's great. Like I don't see the problem with it, and it's causing no press is bad press, I guess.
Well, it's certainly getting a lot of press. It's funny because Seattle just named their National Hockey League franchise that they're getting. It's called the Seattle Kraken. So, of course, from the movies, the term Kraken. But that gets a lot of attention. I already gave it attention, and for the South Africans in the stream, you'll appreciate this. I call them the Seattle Karens, Seattle Karens.
Yeah, I love Seattle. So many of the boys play for them. They're such a good program.
So you've been all over now, but for the Seventh Circuit, from the inside the wire, I mean, your perspective is going to be different than mine. As someone who covers the game from outside the teams and goes as a fan, but from inside the wire, do you have a favorite Sevens location? Is there one you enjoy more than any other?
Yeah, I'm very big on player welfare, so I do things by like high performance standards and what's ideal for us as a team. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't be Cape Town. The boys love Vancouver. It's a really well run tournament. And as an American, we were taught because we have such a healthy rivalry with Canada. It's like you don't want to admit that, but yeah, Vancouver is really well run, and that's a newer one on the series. Paris is, I just love Paris in general as a city. It's not the most exciting tournament. God, it's for so many different reasons. I love so many things. Like Hong Kong is just magical and special, but from a high performance, it's really hard to get to. The locker rooms are small, but it's so prestigious, and we have such a great fan base. The Hong Kong, like our Hong Kong fans, are wonderful. I've become good friends with them, and it's such like a historic tournament that it's so special. And they've done player surveys that winning Hong Kong is more prestigious than winning the Sevens World Series or Sevens World Cup. Yeah, so I would say I don't know. I love Sydney. I mean, it changes. So like when I first started, we were in it was in Port Elizabeth, and then we moved to Cape Town. I mean, it is special playing in the States because we do have a good fan base. But I would say Cape Town, Wellington was special, but it had kind of dwindled down at that point. Hamilton, the stadium is wonderful. The town's a little bit smaller.
There's nothing to do in Hamilton other than go watch rugby.
Yeah, there's not much to do, but they're developing it more. Dubai, I mean, Dubai again. Dubai is like the hotels are amazing. It's not my favorite place. So there's just, but the tournament is so special because again, they have a big festival outside of it. So you're having 10 teams playing, you're having 7 teams playing. There's so many people around it, and the atmosphere is so great. But it's like 45 minutes away from where you stay, out in the middle of nowhere. So it again, high performance wise, is not ideal, but the atmosphere is so great. So a lot of the stadiums and the tournaments are very different from this setup, but they've done a really, really good job because Sevens is so demanding mentally and physically, much more demanding, I think, than 15s. And I can say that because 15s, you're given more space, you're given more time. Mentally, these Sevens players have to get up for a game. 3-day tournaments are really difficult. But World Rugby's done such a good job about adapting. And I mean, there's player welfare groups, and then there's coaching welfare groups. And they always want to work together to make the game better for everybody. So, certain tournaments haven't been ideal the first year that they've moved a place or certain things, and they do a good job about it changing that, because it is so demanding having 10 different stops on the World Series. I think, it used to be 7 and then it was 9. It was spread out a little bit. They keep shifting. Like, it used to be we would go to Wellington and Vegas, and then they switch it so it's Wellington, New Zealand and Australia, so it makes more sense. They do things about flight times, about like how far away you are. Like, Argentina is probably it's always far for them to fly. So you can come a little bit earlier, depending on how far away you are. But yeah, it's constantly evolving. But these sevens too, it's like if you have one match, a 14-minute game, you have to prepare all day like you're getting ready for a 15s match, even if you're only playing 14 minutes, or if you're playing half of that. And then you have to go to bed, wake up again, and then in the middle of a match, because you watch film after every single game of what you just did, and then you have to prepare for the next and change your entire game plan. And in between that, you have to do box visits and go visit people. And plus, on the screen, every mistake you make is amplified. You missed one tackle in the 15s match, it's not a big deal. You miss it in the 7s match, and it's shown on the screen 20 different times. And then, you're reliving that, and then you have to get ready for the next game. And then you have to go talk to people in the middle, go up to do box visits, and then come back down again and prepare. So even though it's not as physically demanding as a 15s match, like you said, 7 minutes can be a really long time if you're chasing Carlin or Perry. And to do all of these things and to shift your emotions, and then to go back on a bus and then eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with your opponents that you're trying to, have this healthy balance of respecting, but also being a competitor. It's so challenging. And so I like it for the same reasons why it's so difficult. Plus, you're getting along with 16 different cultures, which I love. Like, you wake up in Fiji singing in the morning, but there's been times where they're like singing at 7 a.m. and our strength coach was like, could you call down and ask them, it's just beautiful, but you're like, can you tell them to be quiet? It's 7 in the morning. Or, you're watching the Kenyans dance. Like, it's this beautiful mix of 16 different cultures, which is just, I'm really missing it right now, especially, I'm very lucky to be at the beach, but I'm used to being around all these different, amazing, interesting people. So this time of non-traveling has been very difficult.
Yeah, no, it's really sucked with the pandemic because, we were right in the early stages, about 5 games completed for Major League Rugby. It was very competitive this season with the new Free Jacks team. And it was going well. On top of that, the Six Nations was not quite finished, and we had Super Rugby going, and then we had Summer Test Series, and it all just is gone. Plus the Olympics, I was looking forward to the Olympics. That got canceled. That sucked.
Yeah, and people don't understand. They're like, okay, well, it's next year, but some of these players,
Won't be there.
yeah, we're very lucky that we got into 2016, and I was at the announcement in 2009. Actually, it was October. I remember because it was my birthday in New York when we announced that we were in the Olympics. But so rugby's one thing, and a lot of these players will overlap and play in the next. But so a lot of these Olympic athletes, their whole life they've been preparing, and they put off marriage, or they put off school, or they put off so much for this year, and they're peaking now. And to put that off is not, when your job is to be a competitor and compete, is so mentally challenging that we try, and again, I'm studying this elite athlete well-being. You try not to identify. Even when I got injured myself, I had coaches say, like, don't identify yourself as a rugby player. And I'm like, well, that's who I am. I still do, even though I haven't played in 10 years, I still identify myself as a rugby player. And so to take that away from them is so challenging. And then to be told, you can't train when that's all you do all day, or you can't be, when you're in a team sport, in a team environment, to say you have to be isolated and you can't be with your team when you're used to traveling around with 16 different countries is so draining. So, some people say, oh, it's just a sport, but that's their life,
No, but it's more than just a sport from so many other aspects. It's a business. It's all the related stuff. It affects the travel industry. It affects financing. It affects so many different things. It's the hotel industry. It's really it is frustrating. And when you think about it, players, if you got a player, you mentioned someone who's peaking. Yes, that's good. It's bad, but that person probably will still be at a high enough level that maybe they could be around for the next time. or maybe they'll be able to hang around until next year and still qualify. But what about the players on the edge that are almost past it but are still competitive? And so, like,
They were going to retire
yeah,
after.
well, Cecil Africa is retired. He's not going to be back for the Olympics next year, almost guaranteed, and that's a shame because he's an amazing blitzball. He's done a great job for that team, and now he's retired.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm sad about that. I mean, I'm sure he has something exciting planned, but he's such a good person too. He's fun to have. Again, I love the South African team. I love Roscoe and Chris, and I love Neil. And one of my favorite physios is their physio, Hugh. They're great.
No, it's quite a great program Neil Powell's got running there. It's absolutely amazing. It's a sevens factory. It's like they just crank them out. Here's the next one. All these big names. You got Siabatla Sanatla. You've got Ruan Nell. You got all these big names, and then they're gone. And then who's this? Oh, that guy's amazing, and you forget about the other. No, they just keep coming.
Well, that's what in Dubai last year. It was funny because they had a couple of the boys were on the developmental team because they had taken a break. I'm trying to think of who it was. There's two of the boys that had played in the Olympics and were on the series, but they were taking, so they were playing on the developmental team and they had played in the Olympics. People were like, "What's going on?" But they loved it and they were so humble about it because they're like, "Well, yeah, we have to earn our spot back on the team."
No, absolutely. Well, one of the things I really like about sevens, and we've sort of alluded to this, but I never really put it in these terms, is that a sevens tournament is kind of a spectacle. It's all about spectacle, whether that's intent or not. It really is. But as people who are new to the sport, they ask me about sevens. I'm like, it's great, but don't go to the loo because you'll miss the game.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, that's the great thing is you get to watch like 30 amazing games, and I've seen so many matches that have been won with no time left.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I was saying about that France game in Oita at the quarterfinals. It was one of the only 15s games I've seen where it's like you really didn't know what was happening because 8 minutes left, 7 minutes left in a 15s match. It's pretty much decided. It really doesn't come down to one try. But I've seen again so many matches with no time left, and then you have those big Japan upsets or upsets in sevens. So, Fiji and South Africa and the U.S. predominantly have been so good. But, U.S., I remember, again, when we were going back when we were 13th. So then we went to 6th. And, we were winning pretty consistently, but only for a year or 2 years. And so if we lost, people would be like, oh, my God, what's going on? What's wrong with you? I'm like, well, did you forget that we couldn't beat Canada and we were 13th in the world last year? Like, we still are building that, but South Africa and Fiji have, and New Zealand, they have proven that they are just so good. Sometimes they dip down, but when there are these upsets, that's the game of sevens, which makes it so special, is because you have to be on all the time. But they're just so consistently good, and Neil does such a good job they have so many good traditions, and everybody is on the same page in their program that they're just so much fun to watch.
Well, the other thing I like about sevens too is it's never over until that Hooters. That's it because I think it was LA this year, but if you're behind in 15s by 3 tries and there's 10 minutes left in the game, all right, it's time to head to the car, right? But in sevens, if you're down by 21 points or by 3, let's say 3 tries, 15 points, because we're not going to expect them to make the conversion. But say you're down by 3 tries, 15 points with a minute left in the game, you can still win. The Blitzbach was at LA. They won the tournament this year. They were losing by like 20 points or something like that, and they came back and scored, and they won the thing. It was unbelievable.
I know. When you see, again, I'm just going back because I know these players so well. So, but when you see Perry score 3 tries in a row and running, 80 meters, like around 3 different people, like in 2 seconds, that's again what makes the game special. It's so interesting though, because I've still had, even a couple of years ago, some people still don't think sevens is a real sport. Some of your very traditional thinking. And I was like, I don't know if you've watched. Back when I played sevens, it was more of a game of keep away. Yeah. And the strategy was different. Like Mike always says, it's the same game as 15s. It's just different lines of running, and just different thought processes. But like you watch Danny Barrett play or it's like, oh yeah, it's Warner Cock. It was Warner was on the developmental team in Dubai, which was fun, to see him and his hair like running out there, and you're like, why is he on a developmental team? But Neil had him work back into the program. But if you watch Warner play or Danny Barrett play, like you can't tell me that those boys are not playing, as good as the 15s players. And again, I love 15s. I was a flanker. I love the contact. I think it's such a great game, and there's so many elements to it. But sevens is just a little bit more digestible. So again, you can commit to watching 14 minutes, and say like, okay, I want to watch these teams, and I get to watch Fiji, and I get to watch this team, and then I get to watch this team. You don't have to commit to 80 minutes of a game you might not understand. So where I am a big proponent of both, and I do think the game and the thought processes now are very similar. I mean, rugby's rugby. It's just changing the elements a little bit. But I think it's Mike. We're listening to Mike and Neil do this podcast in Ireland. And Mike had a good thing. He's like, it's not to compete with 15s, it's to complement other sports. It's not a builder. And sometimes sevens is used as a builder for 15s, but we were talking about, 10s is a great game as well. But it's to complement other things. And so we shouldn't look at it as a competition against 15s.
No, absolutely. I'll tell you, listen, pound for pound, nobody hits the way that Werner Koch hits. Oh my gosh. That guy just can take out a train.
Yeah, he can. I mean, I would say him and Danny are pretty close.
That's fair.
Yeah, but yeah, probably. I mean, pound for pound, they're probably the same. But yeah, I just love watching. I love Warner's intensity. Like I love watching him play. And again, I haven't come really. I mean, maybe they just don't make themselves noticeable, but I haven't really come across anybody that I don't like. But Warner is such a good person too. Like he just takes his time, and he's always polite, and he always asks you questions. I mean, he's not just, oh hi, how are you? Like that's the one thing about the South African team that I love, is that they're always engaging.
No, absolutely. Well, I love everything about the Blitzbach. I mean, I love the name. It's a cool name. Someone thought that up, instead of Springboks, because they're so fast. But I love that. I love the way that Neil Powell runs a program. They always show up, even when they don't do well in a tournament. They still give it their all, and that's rare that they don't do well in a tournament. Yeah, it's just an amazing team, amazing culture, and they do the game justice. I think quite a bit. But I was going to say, so let's very quickly say so. When I talk about U.S. Rugby here, or we talk about U.S. Rugby, the men, John Mitchell came. Nothing against John Mitchell, but I was a little disappointed. It was just around a 500 record, which was improvement for USA Rugby. It was pretty good. But then Gary Gold comes, and they go undefeated in a test season. They beat Scotland, absolutely amazing. Not the best this past season, but still pretty good. So the men have come, I think, a long way recently. The women in the top four, they finished number 4 at the World Cup in Ireland a couple years ago. They played really well. And then in sevens, of course, we had last year. We can't count this year because it's kind of a wash for HSBC. In part, I say because we had a lot of players who were on the 15s who didn't get back in time to start the 7 seasons because of conditioning. So they started late, and we did okay, not great. But the previous season, every single semifinal, no team's ever done that, number 2, and just missed out on taking the title for the USA for the men. And the women, they're number 2 this season. They're awesome, too, in the sevens.
Yeah, the women, I love our women's team too. And again, just because I was so integrated with the men's program, and it was hard for me to watch. And then as I got older, and I work with the women. I mean, I don't work with the women, but we work alongside the women. I'm in awe of these athletes, and we have such a good program. And so Chris Brown, who used to work with our men's program, is the head coach of the women now, and he's wonderful. And before that, Richie Walker was with them. But I'm doing some work with Naya Tapper, who's just promoting her clothing line. And it's Naya on Fire. Naya is amazing. Chris Thomas, who's from Philadelphia, is absolutely amazing. Alev Kelter, who played ice hockey. I mean, they're insanely good, and they've done such a good job, and they're so fun to watch. I love Australia's women's program. I mean, I love the All Blacks, or the Black Ferns, I guess. some of these women's programs, and it's a shame. It's, you know, a lot of it has to do with marketing, and it's a shame. I think we talked about this the other day, that some people don't understand that why you can't have the men and women play at the same time is a lot of it has to do with player welfare and space. So a lot of these in Sydney, they have enough space. But a lot of these venues like Hong Kong, I mean, my living room is bigger than the locker room, and you're sharing it with 3 different teams, which people don't understand. Sometimes it's 2, but sometimes it's 3. And so for the women and the men to be there at the same time, there's not enough facilities and there's not enough space. And the days are so long that you can't do a men's game, a women's game, a men's game, a women's game, because there's not enough locker rooms. Even at Twickenham, you know, these old stadiums that are gorgeous, but they have small locker rooms, and there's just not enough space to put everybody. And the players can't, I mean, it's draining to do a 2-day tournament, let alone a 3, let alone put 32 teams in. It's too difficult. And then, you know, it's long for the spectators as well. So it's a really long day of watching rugby. It's wonderful, but it's long. So if you put the women in the morning, then some people are going to leave when the men come, or same, they're not going to come till later because you're there till 8 o'clock all day just with men or women. So if you put both there, it's a logistical nightmare. So it's not always about, let's have the men and women and this isn't being equal. It's about what's best for the players.
And just physically what's available. That's a real problem. In Vegas, they sit in the tents, don't they, behind the end of the pitch?
Yeah, and that's what, again, they were going to move it to that
new football stadium.
That, you know, is supposed to have, it's my friend Rob who works out there, 2,000 square foot locker rooms, which is bigger than any stadium that we're at. And again, in Sydney, there's another complex next door that they stay at. But yeah, they're intense. And one year the tents blew over. But being one of the only females, I mean, Canada has a female physio. New Zealand did at one point. Wales had another manager, Sarah, who was, but usually there's only 3 or 4. And so a lot of times the women's bathrooms are turned into for the ball kids or the referees or something like that. So some in Hong Kong, you usually have to go across the street to go to the bathroom. So again, you would have to move all of the men out to put the women there. So it's logistically, it's too tough.
No, absolutely. I can see that, but it can be quite challenging. You talk about the women. I was in Vegas a few years back when they had the men and women play that tournament, that same one, which is the one I love, but I realized what a logistical nightmare it was and how difficult it was for the players. But I was there, and of course, when Kenya came out to play, I made my way over to the general admission section because I buy a reserve ticket. That way I've got a good seat when I want to sit there, but I always move around the whole stadium, get different photo angles. Yeah, exactly. But I make sure I got a reserve one, so I got my seats. I'm like, move, that's my seat. But anyway, so I moved around, and I'm where the Kenyan fans are at, and I'm over there, and I just happened to glance out of my corner eye, and just directly across from me, one row up, I'm like, that's Chris Thomas and Nia Tapper. And I look over, and they look over at me. They kind of smile, and I walk over and got a photo. And now every time I go someplace, I run into Chris Thomas and Nia Tapper everywhere. So it's kind of like it's almost become a game now. Can I find Chris and Nia?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, Chris is from the Philadelphia area, so I have an affinity towards her, and she's such a good athlete. And Nia is just she's doing such a good job about promoting women and promoting athletes, and doing she's again started this T-shirt line and promoting herself while she's still an athlete, which I think is such a good thing to do, because a lot of times these athletes, when they're done, they just which again is part of this athlete well-being that I'm doing, is figuring out what your purpose is while you're an athlete, and but your organization and your team caring about who you are as a person and taking these measurable steps to do that, so that when you don't just think of yourself as an athlete, so you realize when you get injured or something happens or you get cut or a pandemic happens, that you have more to your life than just being an athlete, which is all you see. I mean, I did the same thing as a player. I worked for the U.S. for so long. I didn't think of anything else. I mean, that's who I was, and that's what I did. And so when I stopped, I was like, I don't know what to do, because I'm so used to traveling and being on a set schedule and being told where to go or being the one saying where we're going, that it's hard to transition. I mean, even after World Cups, like 2011, I remember going to New Zealand, which we talked about, which was I mean, they embraced us. Like we were in Taranaki, and I was like, "You have Dan Carter," like, and people were asking for my autograph. But I remember leaving the World Cup, and we, again, we beat Russia in 2011, which is I think our third World Cup win ever, and we haven't won since then. But I remember going home and being like, "Well, no one's doing my laundry, no one's asking, where I am. We don't have security around us," and that's just as a staff member of a team that's ranked, in the teens as a tier 2 nation. And I was lost after that. I was like, I couldn't imagine being like an NFL player and retiring after that when your whole identity is this. So Naya is doing such a good job. But yeah, the Kenyan, I mean, that's the place to be. Yep. So again, going back to Mike, so Mike used to coach Kenya before that. And Kenya, I mean, I love so many teams, but the Kenyan team is so special because they're so passionate about it. And Mike loved their program so much, and they love him so much, and so we became good friends. And so I'm very good friends with Collins and Jera and Willie and Baca and his older brother Humphrey and Collins' older brother Humphrey, and Billy the Kid. Like they're just great, and I call them the trouble team because once they unplugged, because they're always dancing, so they unplugged all the broadcasting to put in their radio by accident. And they're always, I don't know if you ever watched the Parade of Nations in Vegas or in the U.S. tournament, but the last year I was working for the tournament, I had them pick their own music. So they came up and they just always are doing a dance as they're doing that. But they have a nickname for Mike Otoya, I think, which is Cheetah. And forget what Chris Brown, because he worked with them as well. And one year they gave me a nickname because they were just being cheeky. But they are so passionate. And I remember in Singapore, they won. And I didn't realize it was one of their first tournaments that they had won. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. But they overcome so much because half the time they don't have a pitch to practice on. Their union isn't always the most outstanding in what they do. So a lot of times staff and players don't get paid, which is really difficult because they're such a good program.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that we had one since the U.S. Eagles had one since 2011, the men. It's true. But in 2015 and 2019, I think I went to the two games we had the best chances. I was at the U.S.-Japan game in 2015. That's when Eddie Jones was there. I was sitting in the middle of the pitch about 15 rows up, and he came up from the field to go to the booth. And as he came by, he had just signed a contract with Western Province and the Stormers. And I'm like, "Hey, Eddie, thanks for signing Western Province Stormers. I'm a huge fan. Appreciate it." And he smiled at me and kind of shook my hand. And little did I know that he was already being lured away to coach England, but it was kind of disappointing. And then the other one, I think, is in 2019. As I said, I went to the game in Fukuoka against France, and into the 60th minute, we had a chance in that game. I think that's their two best games, even though they haven't won. So it's good to see the boys put up a good effort in those games. And maybe the last game we had this time, too, we probably should have won that game. That was in Osaka. I was also at that game. It was kind of disappointing we didn't win that game, but you can't win all the time.
That was our Tonga match, right?
Yeah, Tonga. Yeah, we had that game at halftime, and just a breakdown or one or two plays. That's all. It was almost like watching a sevens game, because it just one bad, someone missed a tap, and boom, they scored a try twice. It's kind of sucked.
Yeah, the difficult part. I mean, and again, going back to it's great that a lot of these guys are playing in the MLR. The difficult part, like when I first started with the program, is we only had June tests, and that was mainly our Churchill Cup, and then November tests. So we would, even when we would get, like Scott Johnson, I thought was a great coach, and so was Eddie, and Mike Tolkien. But we would do really well. I mean, I think Mike has one of the best records, but we would do really well, and then they would disappear. I think like the PNC, we did have another thing like our Falcons went to, and then they started the PNC. So now we have more test matches, but we would get this head of steam going. And I remember before we played the All Blacks, I was having this conversation with somebody in February because they were saying we should have done better. And I was like, well, we had 4 training sessions. I mean, first of all, I always say we're going to win. We'll never say we're not, but I was working for the team at the time, and we're playing the best team in the world. I mean, they were number 1, and I mean, they're All Blacks. You can't. You can't, I mean, even when Ireland beat them, I mean, they're just insanely good, and their culture is so good. So number 1, we're playing the best team, and I don't know, maybe we're ranked 13th, 14th in the world. But number 2, even with players with like Samu Manoa, who I'm pretty sure he was at Toulon at the time, and he's one of the best players I've ever come across. But he came in. We had 4 training sessions, and they're flying in the Sunday before we're playing the next Saturday. So how can you get on the same page? You're getting over jet lag, and you're learning what your plays are with your coaches. Like we don't have time to, we don't have that luxury of time to gel as a team. So you're putting individually amazing players together, and now that we have more players playing professionally, it's great, and that's helping. But how can you do that and play 4 games and then say, okay, see you in 8 months?
Yeah, no,
It's
that's a real problem. In fact, I wrote an article about this topic in because they were talking about expanding Rugby World Cup with more players, 24 teams or something like that. And Pinchot from World Rugby, who's now left, was pushing to do that in the next World Cup in France, and I disagreed with that. While I'd love to see more countries represented, that's fantastic. There's a real problem with many rugby unions are either bankrupt or on the verge of bankruptcy. Zimbabwe, in order to qualify as an Africa team, went to Tunisia to play, and they got thrown into the street because they couldn't pay their hotel bill. I mean, so that's a problem with rugby. But the other problem I have with it is that you can never get more teams, and you can never have a more serious competition until the tier 2 or no, Dolan doesn't like me calling them minnows because I call them minnows, but USA minnow. But until the tier 2 or tier 3 teams actually play competition. I mean, as you're just the context you're putting in there, we have players that don't play for months, but it's not just that. If you have an American player who's talented, say Ty Clever, somebody like that, or Madison Hughes, something like that, maybe they go play for Sall or for Saracens, but they're the only American over there. They're playing with all these other players, and they might be playing around good talent, but only some of them. The rest don't play there. We didn't have Major League Rugby, so they're back here. They're at university, they're at clubs. They're not actually playing rugby at a professional level. Whereas the All Blacks are playing against and with each other every time you turn around in Super Rugby. They're domestic competition, and then they just gel as a team because they're playing at that high level competition against people. But if the only time that Namibia ever plays the Springboks or plays England is in the World Cup every 4 years, well, no wonder they're going to get slaughtered. There's just no way. I mean, you had Jacques Burger who played for Namibia, great player. And that was about it. Everybody else was just a club player in Namibia.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because actually, Chris Brown, I don't know if you know this, but Chris Brown, who's coaching the women, worked in 2011. He was with Namibia. And I had a friend that played for Philly who's from there, so I always kind of follow them. But so I didn't realize Brownie had been at the World Cup with them. But, yeah, I mean, they're so great at rugby. But I mean, I understand where Gus is talking about bringing more teams because I think the way teams qualify for the Olympics and World Cups, it's like it helps that we already qualified because for Canada, because the way that they do it for the Olympics is top 4 teams now that in the series are automatically qualified. But in Europe with Great Britain, and it's still a little muddled about how teams compete. Like if England rugby is competing against Scotland, and then they're competing as Great Britain. So yeah, I think with Namibia and having South Africa being so strong, it hurts them a little bit. But yeah, the U.S. When we had Todd. I mean, I think maybe we had, when I started in like 2008, like 3 or 4 professionals. I think it's got Mike Kirkus, who was from Australia, who I think he was playing in Japan, Todd. And now we have a lot more. But at the time, like, you're talking about Mike Petrie, who's so great. But, there's some shows on Mike about how he would wake up at 5 a.m, go train, he's a school teacher, teach all day. Now he has 2 little girls and a beautiful wife, Lauren, and just what he has to do. So giving him a professional environment is so important so that they can train every day. But he lives in New York City, so how is he going to train? Who's he going to train with when he was playing with the Eagles, but also working full time with a family? And then the weather's not great and there's no field space. So it's very difficult. So now that they're playing in a professional environment, and I think when pro rugby started, it's still like they weren't providing the same good training that they are now, because now they're starting to bring in people that are really expert. It's, when pro rugby, I think it was even a step down from Super League, because back in the day we had this thing called Super League, which again, Philly was a really strong program at the time then, and they folded because the expense of traveling from Philadelphia to California to play is just so much they couldn't sustain that.
No, absolutely. I'm with you on that. It's. I think the addition. This is why I was so hopeful for Major League Rugby, and really excited about this third season because they've, in my view, they've progressed with the quality of play, with the big name signings they've got. And some people are like, well, they're just players past it. Well, no, not all these players from international are past it. Some of them are in their prime. They've been signing play with Major League Rugby, so it's kind of exciting. Hopefully it'll keep going because that's what's needed. You have to have the ability to make a living off of this and do it, and get proper facilities and be able to travel and such. But there's a comment from Christo Hoyer, who's a South African that works in Saudi Arabia. He's like, "Hi peeps, I'm a little late to the stream. Interesting discussion so far. Was not even aware women's rugby was so advanced." Well, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not again, I haven't been as up on the women's rugby as men's rugby, but the sevens world, because I'm around it, I follow a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to marketing and money and what sells. But I think the women work so hard, and their programs are so good that you can't watch, especially, again, I'll just reference sevens because that's what I've been doing most recently. You can't watch New Zealand or Australia or the US and not say that they aren't amazing, or even, Canada. Like some of their skill level surpasses the men in so many aspects, but it's just about getting them marketed, and viewer time. So again, if you're watching in Dubai and you're in the States and you have to wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning to watch it, and I mean, usually I get like a VPN to watch and use someone's account, like from Sky Sports, because it's not shown, it's not accessible. So we have to make it more accessible.
Well, we've been chatting for quite a bit here. It's been fantastic, Sarah. But there's two things I want to make sure we definitely want to touch on before I let you go. So I've still got you. I'm holding you like the pandemic prisoner for the moment. So two more. Exactly. Yeah. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? But
Beach.
Yeah, but two more things in particular I want to ask you about. So one is Tory Rugby, if you can tell us about that. But before you do, also you've got some activity going on here where you're trying to sponsor or get a tour or a team, something going on in Africa. You and I were talking about Malawi because I used to live and work there. So can you tell us about Tory and then tell us about that?
Yeah, so I started because I'm kind of a jack of all trades, as we talked about. So, I've managed the US, I've been on medical, I do a lot of marketing work. So I started with a friend, my friend Allie, who was in the Army, to do basically a visual resume and just do consulting. And because I've been in high performance for so long, I see where a lot of teams fall short in how they market themselves or what it means to be professional. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just they're doing what they know. It's just they don't know what they don't know. So I've been exposed to so much rugby in so many different ways that it's just a way of showing like the best training ways and, more about the ways I think about nutrition or high performance or just about health. And then I'm very big into player welfare. So I'm the first person in North America to do this elite athlete well-being. This guy, Steve Johnson from Australia, who all of the league teams have somebody certified with it. And I'm working with all these Premiership football clubs, and they have wellness people built in. So it's about identifying what's important to an athlete, seeing them as a person and what their purpose in life is, what their values, what their culture is, and making that measurable so that when you bring them into a team. So I'm going to get certified in this hopefully next month. We were supposed to taking it at Loughborough in the UK. And of course, because of the pandemic, we couldn't travel, so we've been doing Zoom. But so hopefully bring this to the States and to bring it to teams and basically showing how an organization and a team can grow and how much better they are if you actually take the time to care about a person. And it's not that they don't. And, a lot of these aspects people do individually. It's just there's no certification for this yet. And it's just we don't have the resources or the money, or time to do this for all of our players. But it's such a great thing. So that's part of Tory Rugby. And then helping promote, I'm very big in promoting athletes. So people like Naya Tapper, like promoting her Naya on Fire, or Phaedra Knight is starting a clothing line, who's in the Women's Hall of Fame, who's a former opponent of mine and friend. Or Perry Baker has his own PB11, and just helping these athletes promote themselves because they're great at being athletes. But and these three are really good at promoting themselves, but just showing and creating a network of rugby players and helping them do that. And then just because I wanted to do something good, my friend John Layfield, who was a WWE wrestler, helps out all of these underprivileged youth, and he was helping build this complex in Malawi. And so again, I told you I met the CEO, Garrett. He's a Welsh guy who was living in Bermuda, and I met him in Oita, and we had talked before that, but he was like, oh, I'm going to be at the quarterfinals. You want to come down? So I was like, yeah, sure. So we hung out there and sang karaoke. And he's moving his family, his wife and his kids, to Malawi for the year and had to come back because of the pandemic. But they're building this complex, and it's not a school, but a training center there. And so I wanted to bring something. So I had the idea of either bringing teams or people to South Africa to do like a coaching clinic or something like that. Or I was like, oh, there's the Safari Sevens in Kenya. So I was going to talk to like Samurai or the Justers or its teams because it's a high-level men's tournament. And it was at the end of October. So I started this last year, and I was like, oh, this is perfect timing. So I was talking to this guy, Nick Benson, who works for the MLR right now, who is in Utah and grew up in Kenya. He's from DC, but his father was a diplomat. So he grew up in Kenya for 10 years. And he was like, well, let's bring our own team. And so I was like, oh, this is a great idea. So I was like, well, let me just call around and see who's available. So I started calling people that I've worked with who are my friends. And I said, because I want to, bring exposure to this rugby complex in Malawi, but I also want to show that America can do things together and we can promote these athletes and give athletes a way of giving back. So I called Shalom Sunila, who is playing for Seattle, and works in insurance right now. He just started his job there. Who's a wonderful human being, and his brothers played, and he was like, yes, and he played in the Olympics for us. He's like, I would love to go. So my idea is to play in the Safari Sevens and then go for a week and volunteer and show through social media and video everything that they're doing at this complex, and to bring these high-level athletes there that have played in the Olympics. So I got Osea, who is playing for Houston, who is Fiji's Olympic gold medalist, who's in the States, so he's going to come with us. Garrett Bender, who played in the Olympics for us. Threaten Palamo, who's playing for DC, who played in the 07 World Cup, 2000, he took a break to play American football. Yep. And Connor, who played for the U.S., who plays for Rooney. So we represent 5 different MLR teams. We have 5 Olympians. Andrew Duratalo, wow, who's Fijian American. Yeah, I'm just so lucky to have these amazing people. And every single one I called, they're like 100%. They're like, I don't care about playing. I want to go help out. I would love to do this. And so just, again, it's doing 2 things. It's giving these athletes a way of giving back. And then it's showing that we can unite no matter who we play for, because these boys are from all over the country. And then, again, bring exposure to this complex in Malawi to help build them up.
Cool beans. Hey, so Yanni Vanderveld, who's one of my moderators, is just posting links to your social media stuff right now to Tory Rugby and such. So thank you for that, Yanni. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then this one here. Now, I don't know how we have to take this one. So Sarah, let me read this comment. It's not bad, but it's meant to be good. But let me read it out. So Christo, the guy who's in Saudi Arabia, says, Chris, amazing guest. I think Sarah is the female version of Chris Wyatt in terms of excellent knowledge and passion for rugby. I think that's a compliment for both of us.
Thank you.
But then Hendo came back and said, and I think he's talking about you. He says, yes, just better looking as well. Well, okay, that slays me. I take offense at that. I
probably talking about you.
No, I think I'm dead sexy. So that's. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, Yanni's putting in those links. Really appreciate that right now. So that sounds pretty cool. I mean, that's some big names, Olympians and MLR players, and sounds really cool. Did you know? Did they have a location for where this? Do you know what town it was going to be in, or?
Lilongwe.
It is in Lilongwe. Is it going to be in Lilongwe?
Yeah. Well, I know it's 45 minutes from there. Okay. So I can show it. So it's the Bubesi Pride Foundation. So I don't know if you're, so it's Richard Bennett, who's from the UK, and then Garrett is the CEO, and then again, John Layfield, who was living in Bermuda, but he's an American, and he's living in DC area right now. And so he does stuff. He's starting a DC inner city program. He did a Bermuda inner city program, and there's a Memphis in Tennessee program that he joined. He's on the board of. That's a really great organization. So yeah, so they built this without any commercial sponsorship. Bubesi Prad has done stuff all over Africa. But yeah, I mean, it's the general concept of that we all know about using sport as a vehicle for change. But there's all these amazing, passionate people that want to give back, and they just when we go to a country, when the team I play for, Atlantis, we would go to Cuba and we went to Laos, and we would work with Child Fund and did a lot of this stuff. But a lot of these boys, like even though Andrew grew up in Fiji, and when we go places, we can't always, go to do a hospital visit, but again, they're there to compete. So even though we're in South Africa or, we're in all these places, we try to, but that's not their job. So a lot of these guys haven't been given the opportunity to really give back, and they're such wonderful human beings. They did it on a small level. So yeah, the idea is that, which I don't think will happen at the end of October, but we're still trying to get sponsors and get partnerships to create something bigger and to do this long term. So it might not always be in Africa, it might be in the States, but just basically use this as a vehicle for athletes to give back and to do some good in the world.
No, that's pretty cool. You mentioned that athletes giving back and things that promote, particularly in places that are non-traditional locations, perhaps to find rugby. So two things come to mind here in the U.S., one of which, Dalla in Stanford. Dalla is involved in the Play Rugby organization, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's another one called Girls Rugby, both of which one's trying to promote it amongst girls around the country, and the other is focused on inner cities and urban areas.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I want to show is that I think all of these things, and the people that run both of them I know very well, we all complement each other. And like same thing with this. Like this is not to compete with another like touring sevens team. Just sevens is easier to get connected. This I was like, oh, it just works because Safari Sevens is a high-level men's tournament. I would bring women if there was women or a youth team, but it just happens that this is high-level men, so established. So it just kind of worked because to get to Malawi, you have to either fly through Nairobi or Johannesburg, I believe. So that's why I was thinking, oh, I could do something in Johannesburg as well, and I probably will bring a group of people. But this just worked. I was like, okay, well, this will be a group of athletes that I'm taking. So I would like to do other things. But yeah, Play Rugby is a great organization that Mark Griffin started, that I'm good friends with, and that Will is running. And I go to all their fundraisers. They're in New York and California. I think Dallin worked with them in California. And then Girls Rugby is a great organization as well. I mean, I think there's so much room for all of this. And this is just, again, one example that came up. And I selfishly, I wanted to go to Malawi. So I was like, well, it'd be more fun to bring a team there. So.
Well, I don't think that's selfish. I mean, I lived and worked there. It is known as the warm heart of Africa. It's quite a lovely country. Still a lot of poverty, but it's a really awesome place to check out. Yeah, I enjoyed my time in Malawi. It's fascinating. Lilongwe is it's just a capital, but if you get in the Shire country or you get towards the lake, it's quite an interesting place. A lot of interesting things to do. But I'll tell you something. There's a lot of people there. It's the most densely populated country on the mainland part of Africa. It's just the islands that have more denser populations. So everywhere you go, you're going to see somebody.
Yeah, no, I was excited. I mean, so again, we're planning this for the end of October. We've kind of put it on hold for a bit just because the States, well, I guess all over, even if we don't have the tournament, we want to still go, hopefully by the end of the year. If not, it might interfere with the MLR season, so it might have to be a different group. We'll definitely go next year. So we are looking for sponsorship. There's a link, and I named the team right now the Jaguars because we just looked at different names and what they represented, and just the symbolism of a jaguar because it's native to the Americas and just what it represents as an animal. Just spoke to my friend Allie and I, and this guy Nick Benson. But we are looking for title sponsors. So again, if I just have to bring these group of guys without playing, we'll probably do that as well. But yeah, right now, we're not sure what's going on.
Well, as far as things native to North America, mountain lions, but that doesn't ring very well. Cougars, but unfortunately that word has been
Yeah,
corrupted.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that doesn't work too well, but it's a shame. But that's like a good name, Jaguar. But we have to make sure we don't call them the Jaguares and confuse them with the Argentines.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the same thing. We were going to do, like, Bubezi, I guess, means lions. So we were going to do these Bubezi lion. But, and then I was like, oh, well, the lions, then you'll think of the lion, the British lions. But, there's the Chicago Lions. There's names that conflict with everyone. So, yes, Argentina. But I don't think there's a sevens team. That's,
No, no, I'm not aware of one. But Blues Pixies jumped in and said Monkey Bay on Malawi is awesome, colorful aquarium type freshwater fish. Yeah, in fact, many of the world's tropical fish that are in freshwater aquariums that you have in your fish tanks around the world, many of them originate from Lake Malawi. It's
yeah, no,
quite.
unfortunately, I haven't gone yet. I wanted to go this spring or summer just to check it out so that, but again, but yeah, Bubezi Pride Foundation, if you look at their website, which is, I put a link, like a whole page on my website for it as well. And then I put a link of the players, and I take a lot of photographs. And so luckily most of the pictures, actually, Matt Turner was coming, who's South African, who is playing for Seattle and played for England. He's on the roster as well. So yeah, it's an amazing group of people. And the coach, I asked this guy, Adrian Ferris, who coaches Life West, who's originally from New Zealand, to coach. A strength coach that worked with U.S. Women, who also worked with Kenya before. Ian is going to be our strength coach. I had a trainer from Seattle as well. So they're all on the site. And I have all these amazing pictures of the boys that I've worked with. And so, yeah, our vision is to storytell, through pictures and videos, and to promote who is ever sponsoring us, and, through the boys' social media. So yeah, it's going to be a great thing. I mean, hopefully it'll happen soon. This lockdown is killing me like it's killing everybody else.
No, it's awesome. I think I might have to try and find some way to get involved, get back to Malawi and do
We'd
this.
love to have you. We'd love to have you.
It'd be great. I don't speak Chichewa, but at least I know what it is.
More than me.
Yeah, so Dietrich Busche says that, no, it was Monkey Bay is stunning. That's not what I was looking for. Oh, he's saying Blantyre. Yeah, Blantyre is the commercial capital of, the unofficial commercial capital of Malawi. It's in the south, the center of the country. And you drive from the Shire country from the long way south, you go to Blantyre. And that's where Ryle's motel is at, or hotel. It's a hotel now, but it's the oldest hotel in the region. And it's got very historic, a lot of famous people stayed there. And now it's part of the Protea chain, which now belongs to Marriott. So if you got Marriott points, you can get that. And then there's a Carlsberg brewery. There's a Carlsberg brewery in Blantyre in Malawi. It's the only one in Africa. It's not quite, the tour is not quite as good as the one in Carlsberg in Copenhagen, because I've been to that one, but it's still a pretty good brewery tour. And then on the way back north, if you go straight north, you go through Zomba. And Zomba is dominated by this big mountain that sits right next to it. And it has like a microclimate. If you go up there, and I've done that, it'll be like 10 to 20 degrees cooler and pleasant weather compared to what it is down on the savannah. If you keep going straight north, you wind up at Monkey Bay. So there's a little geography tour.
Well, maybe we'll have to spend some extra time. So this trip we were planning again on going, and training, like we're on the seventh stop for Safari Sevens, and then going and spending a week on the complex, because they're building it as we speak, a complex in Malawi. So for the boys, it's not going to be a sightseeing trip. They're there solely to give back to the community. But the next, when I go, I'll have to go around. But yeah, we'd love for you to be involved. I mean, I've had a couple people contact me, because I'm about including everybody and everything. And this is just a pilot program for us. So we'd like it to expand into something different. So if there's any other opportunities that we can take people on, right now it's a little hard to plan, but we would love to do it. It's just, again, I just wanted to do something. I wanted to get back to my roots of Atlantis and giving back to where places that we would go. So it just, because of the people that I've worked with, it just seemed like a very natural fit. So.
Yeah, I have to say that Malawi, in the long way, one of the best people ever that's worked for me anywhere in the world. And of course, people work for me in multiple countries around the world. Kalezi Zimba works in the American Embassy, and he worked for me there. He's fantastic, top drawer, guy knows everybody, gets things done, really talented, and just a real professional. So if we get over there, we'll have to say hello to Kalezi.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it doesn't happen at the end of October, which it's, not looking too promising, again, we'd like to go still by the end of the year, so it doesn't interfere with the MLR schedule. If not, we're definitely going to go next year. But yeah, you should look up Ubezi Pride, and I'll put you in touch with them.
Sounds like a good plan. I would say that you may have to, if as you mentioned, the two routes in there by flight normally are with Air Kenya coming out of Nairobi and or South African, which would come from Johannesburg, which is the main route most people come in. But given that the African National Congress decided that the lockdown will end in the year 2097, you may have to worry about the Nairobi route.
Yeah, no comment.
And, my channel deals with politics, but this isn't a politics one, so we were just talking rugby. So,
Yeah,
yikes.
I'll come on one of your trips to Africa just to.
Crazy stuff. Yeah, no, Christo, really quickly before we close out, asked a question about South Africa and women's rugby. He said last time he was aware there's a women's team was in 2004. I think that's because they don't get much attention, and they're not really well known. The 15 side, people don't even know they exist, to be honest, outside of South Africa. And I think a lot of South Africans don't know it. And the 7 side, honestly, I didn't know there was a women's 7 side until recently. I was kind of surprised. So they don't get a lot of attention.
I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to be quoted on this, but again, because I've been immersed in men's rugby, but I'm pretty sure that the South African women qualified for 2016, but then there was either a lack of funding or something happened that they had to pull out.
They did pull out of Rio. That's true. But I think they're qualified. They were qualified for this summer, if I'm not mistaken, and they're still going. So they'll be in 2021 in Tokyo, assuming it happens in 2021.
It will. It has to.
Yeah, it has to. It has to. Well, when I was in Japan for the World Cup, you were there too. But at the airports, they sell all the kit and the little trinkets and stuff for the Olympics, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna come here for the Olympics. It's gonna be hot and muggy, and I don't know. Who knows what I'm doing? Maybe the next chapter will be started. So, but you know what? I'll buy some of the stuff, and I bought it, and I was like, wow. Now it's been postponed. This is gonna be like very valuable. No, they're just gonna keep calling it the 2020 Olympics, apparently.
I don't know, because I get obviously emails from Team USA and they're selling your stuff, and I've noticed, because a friend of mine was asking, that a lot of the stuff that doesn't have the date on it, it just says Tokyo. But yeah, I don't know, did your stuff say 2020?
I've got a few things that say 2020. That's right.
Yeah, I think probably they're coming out with that. They're just saying Tokyo Olympics.
Well, then maybe it will be a collector's item. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe it will.
All right, Sarah, listen, the hazard with this is that we get along well, and I think we could talk for 5 or 6 hours, but we probably should both get on to something else. But listen, I want to thank you for coming on and being my guest today. It was brilliant. You're my second rugby-specific guest for the segment I call Rugby Ascendant. I had to come up with a name no one else had, and I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, I'm honored to be on after Dallin, who's a good friend. So.
Oh, no, Dallin is brilliant. He's a lot of fun. The guy's high energy. He's like me, and you too. I think we all 3 of us make coffee nervous, as Nora Ephron said, and you've got mail.
Yeah, only when I'm talking about rugby. Dallin, he has a lot of energy. I mean, I knew him when he was still playing. I worked with his last year of playing, and then he was our media director, and so he's become a good friend. And we've worked on stuff with the Premiership Rugby together. And yeah, he just moved to the East Coast now, so.
Yeah, he did. Actually, that's true. He did get here. So, Dallin and I run into each other one rugby event or another. And if he's going to be there broadcasting, I always make sure I link up with him. The one I did miss him was the Springboks game in D.C. because he called that game. But that stadium, as I said, is a third world stadium. I think it was set up to keep people from getting to the press box. I couldn't get up there.
Yeah, no, I haven't. And Dallin and I also worked together. Well, he was playing at 2013 at the Maccabi games in Israel. So we spent time there too. But yeah, 2011, he came with us, in 2015. And then, obviously I see him on the series, and I didn't actually meet up with him in Japan. I met up with some other people, but.
Now, what my audience really seems to enjoy is war stories. Well, we won't do them now today. What I mean by war stories is some, behind the curtain, some things that happen in rugby that might be interesting that you don't want to get, we can change the names to protect the guilty. I mean, the innocent. But I'd like to get you back on the channel, and maybe we could talk about war stories or just talk more about rugby if you'd be interested.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I mean, I'd say the one thing is I'm very good at being behind the scenes, so I don't pay attention to a lot. Some of the boys would be funny, and one of my favorite players, who again his family, Lou Stanfill, who is from California, who played for the U.S. for a very long time in the 15s, and him and his good friend Chris Biller would have the same conversation every night in the physio room. So I realized that I filter about 90% of what they say. But our boys are really so good that they behave. I mean, they're really such good human beings that I don't really have any stories to tell. Plus, I filtered, I think, to survive so long with all of around men's rugby, being one of the only females, is that I filter 90% of what I listen to. So I really don't pay attention to a lot of the nonsense that they talk about. Not that they're saying anything bad. So I'm not the best person because I don't put myself in a situation to see anything. But yeah, no, I mean, I have lots of stories.
Well, we'll have to do that on another broadcast sometime. But anyway, thanks a lot, Sarah. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy the weather.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing we can enjoy. That's about it.
I know. Yeah. Okay. Well, have a great day.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care, Sarah. Okay, she's going to drop off, folks, and I'm going to close out the stream here in just a moment. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in once she leaves the meeting there. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Sarah, so much for being my guest today. Really enjoyed you having on. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in to Chris Wyatt Africa for this segment from the Rugby Ascendant section of my channel. Sarah, fantastic guest. As you can see, she knows a lot of people in rugby. She's been all over. She's done pretty much anything you can think of in rugby, and she's still doing it. So thank you so much for being a guest. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll do a straight voltage stream later this evening at 3:35 Eastern, 9:35 in South Africa and Botswana. So I'll set that up. Tune in for that if you'd like. Thank you for tuning in for this. Tomorrow, 2 streams. I have a live stream at noon South Africa time, 6 a.m. here on the East Coast with the Conscious Caracal. If you'd like to tune in tomorrow, Conscious Caracal will be on the channel, Ernst van Sall. And then I'll have a guest later in the afternoon at noon Eastern, 6 p.m. South Africa time, Patricia Laborda, who works for UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland, on Wall Street in New York. And we're going to be talking about women veterans on Wall Street. So it ought to be interesting. Folks, thanks a lot. I'll catch you a little bit later on. I notice a lot of people have taken off. I think that Ronaldo must be on because we lost some of our audience. But thank you all so much for tuning in and enjoying this. We got 61 likes on this. It's a good audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll catch you here later on Chris Wyatt Africa. Enjoy the next couple hours, and I'll catch you guys here shortly, okay? So thank you very much for that, folks. We'll catch you shortly.